Welcome back, viewers. You're watching The Narrative, and we have returned. We're back on air, and we are so happy to be back with you and bringing you all of the big current affairs and news issues in Grenada, the region, and the rest of the world. I'm speaking with Daisy Hazard. She's the president elect of the Public Workers Union. She was elected just a few days ago to serve for the next 2 years at the helm of Grenada's most powerful union, the Public Workers Union. Daisy, welcome back to the program. Now, going
Thank you.
forward, before the break, we were talking a lot just about the government's overreach in union business, which, as you said, may not have been seen before at that level at all in Grenada. But what kind of relationship are you hoping to forge? Because there's a lot of interface that has to happen between government and union. You have salary negotiations. You have, like you said, sometimes the government wants to meet with workers on some major issue. They've got to go through you. You need to deal with the cabinet secretary for meetings. And so, as president, what relationship are you hoping to forge? Or what
As president,
atmosphere are you hoping to try to enable?
right. So typically when you hear the word union, you solidarity fight. And indeed, union is always fighting for betterment for its workers, is always striving and seeking to ensure that the workplace is a suitable environment for workers where they can feel a sense of justice, that there's equity among, among men, women, there's equity in the workplace, that workers are not discriminated against, that workers get just pay, that their work environments, their health and safety is not compromised. And so it's always a matter of where the union is going to government to ask for more, to ask for better. I believe, however, that a relationship where there is good social dialogue, where there is good relationships, where there is good reach across the table and across the phone lines, that's the best kind of relationship that we can have with government, even if there are contentious issues or issues of conflict to resolve. Because the best way to resolve conflict is in a peaceable manner, or in a manner where when we are done resolving it, both employer and employees can feel some sense of satisfaction. So it is my intention, and I've said that already publicly, one, to attempt to establish a new kind of relationship with the government, to pay that courtesy to government, to sit with government and to say, what is a framework of achievement that we can agree on? What is the kind of relationship that we'd like to have in terms of government and administration? What are some targets, some things that we can agree on upfront that government and union is going to work towards? For instance, if you go into the ministerial complex right now, you would notice that the roof is open, that the ceiling tiles are mostly missing on most of the floors. Workers are falling sick. Workers are cycling in and out of the job just to keep their health not as compromised as it is. I would want to sit with government to determine what's going to happen next. What are timelines that we are working with? Who's responsible? Is there anything that the union can say? Can we go to departments or ministries to have those conversations? So my approach will be relationship building. My approach will be strategic. Let us agree on some strategic things, and let us agree that when there are conflicts and situations to be resolved, how together we can work those out. That is the approach I intend to take as president. However, I can tell you that the core function of union in terms of advocating for and defending its members, I will not be deviating from that at all. I will not be compromising on those matters at all. But my goal will be to ensure that as far as it's possible, industrial relations and industrial peace between employer, and that's not just public sector main service, we also have all of our statutory organizations. And so that will be my goal, to reach out to everybody initially and to establish that kind of a rapport.
Now, on the other side of the coin of all of this, when we talk about public offices, is a question of productivity. And it's something that I had raised with you on previous interviews when you were here in your capacity as public relations officer. Now you are leading the union. Uh, the issue of productivity, how do you intend to tackle that? Because people are saying, we're not really getting as much value for money as we should out of the employees of the government.
When I was preparing mentally for this program with you, Kalishra, I wrote that question down because I knew you were coming with it. It is critical for all of us Grenadians, for all of us citizens, to have a public sector that is fully functional, that is highly productive and efficient. And so, as president elect of the union, I cannot say that there is a different goal or desired outcome that I can have or that we can have from here at the union. A productive worker is an easy worker to defend. A productive worker is an easy worker to say, I need better percentage increases for. And so, as president, definitely, I will be appealing to my members, and we will be taking steps to ensure that members understand that the union values productivity. We value professionalism. I've listened not just to rank and file workers, but to supervisors as well. And they have had complaints. There are things that they have asked the union to look into and to work on. And but at the end of the day, Kalistra, if your workforce is not producing, is not as efficient as it ought to be, that's a function of the employer. And if government workers are not as professional or productive as they ought to be, then the administration needs to look into its management functions. Who are the managers that you have put into place? Who are the managers that you have graduated without anybody noticing a clear meritorious path into offices, and how are they functioning? How are the departments functioning? Because that is a concern that we hear echoed across the public sector. And at the end of the day, a worker will produce and will function according to how management operates. The Grenada Public Workers Union, we do not manage the day-to-day operations and functions of government. That is not within the ambit or the mandate of the union. That is solely within the ambit and the mandate of public managers, public sector managers. And so that's a question for the administration, that's a question for DPA, and that's a question for the PSC. We have had to say to the PSC and to DPA that we are not totally satisfied. And in fact, if the public remembers, in 2023-24, PSC had to embark on an aggressive routine and program of training for the officers, especially the ones that had been newly placed into management offices or management positions because they were not doing as well as they should. And so my hope is that going forward, we'll see better management structures and we'll see better output within the PWU, and the union will do its part under my leadership.
Now, the regularization and pension reform, those are two big ticket items. Well, apart from upcoming salary negotiations, those are two big ticket items that must be on your agenda, Madam President elect. Let's talk about the workers in the healthcare system who seem to be getting. I have received a lot of complaints directly from nurses and other workers within the healthcare. They always stop with me to talk about their plight. And I discovered some things which I did not know actually existed, and I was shocked. But you are going to have to put a lot of focus in that, and this is something that you've talked about also on my program in the past. One of the category of workers you've referenced that really needs proper attention in terms of the employment status. Any plans for how you intend to engage once you get out the gate on this matter?
Right. So there is data that the union is working with. There is data that the union is working with. And I must congratulate at this point Sister Nikisha St. Bernard. She's a nurse, a senior nurse manager. And she returned the most amount of votes from among our membership in the elections. And that really tells us how we feel about our nurses, in as much as sometimes we complain about them and we criticize them so badly in the society. But the ratification by our members for Sister St. Bernard really spoke loudly that our nurses are valued, that we believe in them, that we trust them. And the plight of nurses continue where they are not properly regularized, that when you go to a workplace, a health center, a clinic, the general hospital, from nurse to nurse, there's nurses under Labucan, hired by Labucan to work with the government. There's nurses hired by Gren Case to work with government. There's nurses who tell you, I'm not certain where I am. And so the plight of nurses in terms of how they are employed and how they are remunerated, three-quarter of the population, or perhaps half the population of nurses at the general hospital, are not even unionized. They are working for the government and people of Grenada. They cannot enjoy the benefits that the union negotiates for, or if they do, it's in a loose arrangement. They cannot enjoy the protection of a union, but yet they are public servants working in our healthcare. And I've looked at the budget statements, I've read it, and I've seen what government has said its intention towards the healthcare sector is, continuing to pay governments and doctors and nurses $1,500 respectively. But it's not part of their salaries. They cannot take it to the bank. It's not as meaningful as it should be had it been a negotiated settlement with the union and not just a gift from government, from the administration. There are nurses out there who have said, "This is my plight," and listening to them in their numbers is heartbreaking. We have to do better for our nurses, for our healthcare providers, not just nurses or pharmacists, technicians, everybody. And certainly the work of the union is cut out. And I will be approaching government on a case by case, a group by group basis to try to resolve the problems of nurses, regularization, and salary upgrades and increases. Yes, that is what will happen from my end. So it will be a very strategic approach using science and data.
Okay. One of the things I spoke to a nurse recently. I had to ask her when she told me what her salary was. I had to ask her
Yes.
how long she had been a nurse, and up until recently, she was earning under $2,000 a month. And I wondered, you hear all the complaints, oh, we're losing our nurses, they're going overseas, they're going overseas. Now I understand why. Um, a nurse cannot be paid under $2,000 or $2,500 or $3,000 a month. Nurses, I believe, should be paid decently. Mind you, they need to offer the service and not be so mad at everybody when you come. But maybe they're always mad at us when we come for service because they're not paid enough. Um,
The nurses have been working under siege and they work in very adverse conditions. They work without proper numeration. And I'm happy that you've discovered that, Kalistra. And it's very difficult for somebody to be pulling 12-hour shifts, leaving your children unattended, leaving your homes, leaving your families, and you go into a plant where it's not adequately resourced. In fact, last week we were having a conversation with Sister Saint Bernard, and she said, "Let me ask for that. As a nurse, I'm used to begging." Because literally, as a nurse, you have to go from ward to ward, begging, asking another ward, "Can you lend me some bandages? Can you lend me some medication? We're going to attempt to give you back." And that happens in our clinics and hospitals. And when I look at the budget statement for 2025, I didn't see a very cogent plan, a structured plan that reassures the union as to what is going to happen within our healthcare services. I see a plan for a hospital. That's futuristic. But even if we have a hospital in the future, what of the people who will staff it? What of the equipment and resourcing? And what about keeping our nurses here and not running them into the ground? We signed a fringe benefit agreement in 2023, and we were able to put in a death benefit. A benefit which says if you die before pensionable age for 1 year, your family, where they are minor children and where you are the head of the household, would receive your income as a gap for the family. And four nurses died out of our entire public sector population. That's a statistic that is revealing and interesting. And are we working on our nurses to the bone? Are we overworking them? We asked for and signed agreements that nurses should have lounges and so where they can relax when they are doing 12-hour shifts and that they don't have to sit on the ward or sit on a bench outside. And then you hear the public complaining and saying, every time you go up there, they're on the benches. Yes, that's their staff room. That's their break room. That's where they can sit to put their legs up to get some little relief working a 12-hour shift. And
Well,
that has not even
but
been done.
but it's interesting with all of the refurbishment that took place with the hospital over the years, the General Hospital at its location over the years, that a nurses' lounge. I mean, I remember there was back in the day before we had even what passes now from a modern version of our little hospital back then. That there was accommodation for nurses. Are you saying that we did all of this, spent all this money, and we
I
don't
don't,
have
I think
specific accommodation?
no, there isn't even a proper cafeteria. Yes, there are people who come around, vendors and so who come around the hospital and they provide that service, thank God. But nurses, there isn't even a cafeteria. And we're not just talking nurses here, because our healthcare provision is not just about nurses. While we recognize them because they wear these spanky uniforms, but we're talking about all of the people who provide, come together, the teams that come together to provide healthcare. If you look at where doctors are supposed to park right now at the General Hospital in the dust, in that little area that can hold about 10 cars, if so much, and there's a big drain across it. And this is where our doctors are meant to park. And you're wondering, well, while we're thinking about building a hospital, in the meantime, don't we want to give our workers some dignity and some basic provisioning? And why do we believe that we should ask people to come into plants to provide that kind of a service to a nation where they save lives? But it's too much for us as a people to provide them with some basic accoutrements, some basic necessities that can take care of them while they're working. And I think as a people, sometimes we overlook those little things and we think that's not money well spent. What do they need a lounge for? And in some ways, sometimes we're not as human. And our humanitarian approach to workers is sometimes very lacking, especially our healthcare workers.
Well, they do need a lounge because a nurse who is not overworked and sleepy and cranky is going to give better service. Um, Moving on, though, to the issue of regularization. In the budget, it was mentioned over 5,000 workers still left to be regularized. Now, the government has gone ahead and passed new pension regulations, but we still have the 1958 pension, which was the subject of the court action, which came out in the favor of the workers. We still have that running simultaneously with these new arrangements that the government has made. Uh, do you intend as president to look into and to pursue any sort of legal and judicial relief over this issue of the new pension arrangement?
Kalisha, I believe that we have to commend the efforts of the administration to look into the issue of pension reform. Because although unions worked very hard and we were able through the courts to reinstate 1958, 1958 does not and did not cover everyone. Now, based on the laws of Grenada, people who work with the government and people of Grenada are not employees. You are public servants. And there is a gravitas and a responsibility in law that comes with that. And so the argument can be made, is it proper to not have public servants be regularized and receive or be covered under the PSC properly and receive a 1958 pension? And then the other argument would be, how does that fit and work in our society in the long run? How does that benefit Grenada? We must plan for pensions. Pensions cannot be paid just because pensions have to be paid. But as a people and government, I believe, yes, we must plan for pension. We must know where pension money is going to come from. And right now, there is a contributory scheme that the society feels is just. And so the union applauds government for that. However, there are areas of the pension bill that is wanting, that is lacking, that does not suffice. And so certainly as union, we have a responsibility to go back to government about that. And as I said before, our members are asking because there are many areas that they are not satisfied. They don't feel secure about in the present pension reform bill. Now, as for legal action, we have to look to the future to see what workers will do because everybody is aware of the law. And so, a person who now falls under pension reform, who may well feel that because of the number of years that I've been working, I should qualify for 1958. Let's see what they do, because that is what happened in the past when there was a pension disqualification qualification act. But from the premise of union, what we want to do is to speak positively to the thing and to see how we can appeal to government to make it better, to make it more secure in the areas that we as union had pointed out before, and where our members are now coming forward to say, I have concerns and I'm uneasy. So from the union's point of view, from my position as president, that is my take at the moment.
If you had to pinpoint one big area, one critical area that both the union and workers are concerned about under the new pension act that has been passed into law, what would it be?
So we are not satisfied that our pensions have been removed from the safety and sanctity of the consolidated fund. And at the same time, while that was done, while public officers' pension was removed from the safety and sanctity of the consolidated fund, we saw a new group of workers who were never covered under 1958 receiving pension, themselves and their spouses. That's members of the legal fraternity. And they are now covered under the consolidated fund. And so the question remains, why would you create a pension fund where you remove people who had that cover and that umbrella, but you take another group of people who never had it and you place them there, knowing well that it's a better arrangement? The other concern that workers have is, why do you want to constitute a new board to manage my money? I don't trust boards. Boards have to be paid, boards have to have offices, boards have to have staff. And so we're not satisfied that the monies that we're going to be paying into a pension fund is going to be managed by a board. CLICO comes to mind, British American comes to mind, and some workers have said, well, there is already an NIS. So why not amend the NIS law to be able to manage that fund? And even if they have to increase staffing a little bit, it will not be an entire board. Neither would it entail all of the expenses that a new board would entail. And the structure of boards, as we know, is always predicated by a preponderance of the sitting administration. Workers don't trust that. They don't want boards to manage their money. They want it to be managed within the construct of the consolidated fund. Um, Also, when you look at the numbers, when you calculate the figures, there are people who will go home with very little money. Even if we're saying it's a pension, they will go home with what amounts to an annuity, a little annuity, but nothing that is really significant as a pension should be to take care of them in their old age. So even with this present pension reform, in the future, there are persons who will be retiring, and the handshake that they will get will still leave them in poverty. But that's the future. So those are some of the points that members have pointed out, and we union as well, we're concerned about.
And those you intend to continue to engage government to see whether or not you can get some
Absolutely.
amendments, because laws can be amended and quite easily too, in the parliament.
Yes, yes.
Before I let you go, I want to touch on the issue.
Regularization.
uh,
You
the,
mentioned it several times, but we didn't touch on it at all.
and but is it happening? Is it happening on the under well, the whole pension thing is sort of the focus of everyone right now in terms of what are people going home with, but there's the issue of the government promising to regularize everyone and then saying, well, no, we can't, and then tweaking it somewhat. I was about to say a little bit, but tweaking it a lot after the election. That has offended some people and raised a lot of questions from your union. Where are you coming down and moving forward as president on regularization going forward?
I smile a lot, Kalisha, and I do smile. Even when moments are very serious, I do find a relief in it. Semantics and playing with words is not regularization. When regularization was being debated in the parliament last week, I happened to be in a ministry in the personnel department. And the workers were like, who are these workers government is talking about? Where are they? Does anybody know anybody who's been regularized? Where are these numbers coming from? That's not my words. That's the words of workers who are listening and saying, why are they saying these things to the public? Because we don't know about it and we don't have the evidence of it. Pension reform is not regularization.
Are you saying that the three or 500 workers, or was it 300 workers that the government announced had been regularized is a myth, a fiction?
Regularization means when the union and workers speak regularization, what we mean is that someone receives a letter that says you are employed by the government and people of Grenada through an instrument properly sent to you from the Public Service Commission. That's what regularization means at its core, at its basic. And the administration is aware of that. So if you upgrade someone's salaries and they had a contract that had expired and you now offer them a new contract, and or they didn't have a letter before and you give them another letter or you give them a new contract, that is not regularization.
Mm.
And to put that into the public space and to say to the public that workers have been regularized and we have done, I'm looking at here 300 temporary officers. I'm looking at figures like 1,262 workers holding PSC contracts and ministry letters will be regularized by 2025. Is the administration saying that these workers will receive instruments of appointment from the PSC? And the answer clearly is no. And are we saying that the 300 that we said have been regularized and the other numbers called, that they will receive instruments of appointment from the PSC? The answer is no. That is not regularization. That is regularization according
You're
to a
saying that
form.
those 300 workers, because there was this big fanfare that they had regularized the first 300 or so, I believe I have the number right, they did not receive instruments on the Public Service Commission.
No, very few of them.
So
Not
some did.
300. And I would like the union will be going for that information. We'll be asking the DPA to provide it. We'll be asking the government to provide it. And we have been asking. And no bulk of workers have received PSC letters. That's not true at all. We do have some workers who have, but in the main, what has happened is that where contracts had expired, where people had no contracts, they received new ones. And in general, people did get um, higher salaries. Their salaries were increased. We heard that there were persons who received large payouts. We also heard that there were people sitting side by side with persons, and I might have coming into the service before this person. I'm working. Let me give a typical example. There's a young lady that has been employed with the government and people of Grenada for 20 years, 20. Her salary today is $1,300, 1300. But she sits in a department with other people who last year, for whatever reason, received a payout from government for because their contracts were renewed and their salaries were brought up and they received payouts and adjustments for previous years when the salaries were not where it should have been. Now we've heard that. We've seen the evidence of it, but none of that was shared with the union by government properly or officially at all. That has created a lot of dissonance and a lot of unease and unhappiness within the service. And so, again, as I've said, I will be going to the government and to the DPA. And we will be asking for names so that we can come back to our members and say, yes, true proper regularization, establishment of officers, that is taking place, that is happening. But let's look at the numbers for teachers quickly. It spoke about 224 teachers are being processed for regularization. A teacher will receive their instrument of appointment from the PSC properly. You might be a grade one, a grade two teacher, a qualified teacher. Your instrument is going to come from the PSC. And so, are we now having a case where we continue to provide instrumentation for one class of public servants that puts them properly under the PSC, and then another group of public servants, we leave them still with contracts or with some kind of a letter? That is a question my union will be probing, because a public servant is a public servant. I'm happy to see that the government is doing pay and grade for police officers. Police officers have asked me to speak about that as president of the PW. But I'm really happy to see that in this budget cycle, it has been catered for. Congrats to the administration, because that has not been done for police officers since 1995.
That's a big gap. That's a big gap. That's a big
Yes.
gap.
Yes.
And then constables, privates getting an increase. of upwards of $700. That's a big jump.
Yes. That's what's said. So let's see what happens in reality. But the fact that government has taken the onus and the impetus to do that, they have to be commended, because there is no way that police officers should be working for less salaries than even our poor nurses and doctors and other public servants. They shouldn't be.
Well, I would say there's no way nurses should be working for the salaries that they are working for
Absolutely not. No way.
at all. Now, before I let you go, let's touch a little bit on the situation with the U.S. government and Cuba. The U.S. government seeking to interfere with the medical program, the overseas medical program that Cuba extends to countries in the Caribbean and other parts of the world under they're bringing up labor arguments. They're talking about human trafficking and that they're not properly paid and so on. So those are labor arguments that they're putting forward. But the thing has serious implications for us because they're threatening to withhold the visas of leaders and people in power and their immediate families as a repercussion if we maintain this relationship. By we, I mean the countries involved with Cuba as one of the leaders of civil society in Grenada, how do you react and respond to the development of that nature?
Well, what I would want to say to Grenadians, and I've not been able to discuss that with my outgoing president or executive, but what would want to say is that I believe we should all take a deep breath as it concerns the United States of America, our neighbor, our giant neighbor to the north. I believe that the pronouncements that we hear daily, some of them seem shocking, some of them seem unsettling, but I believe as a people we ought to take a deep breath and calm ourselves a bit, because every nation has a right to articulate how they want their nation to function. And I believe that we owe it to the American people to do that for themselves. That's my first thing. Second thing, I want to do a little public service announcement here. I would want to caution people about making inflammatory and damaging statements about the US government on social media. Because when you go for your visas 10 years from now or 5 years from now, they are going to ask you for your social media handles. And if you've been making statements against that country, you cannot expect to get a US visa or to have it renewed. So I want to caution people. People have been doing it. I see people in the social media space and I'm wondering, what are they thinking? Not all of us want
Well,
a US visa, but
they're
when,
probably thinking they don't plan to go to America.
well, in general, I think many of us enjoy the privilege of having a US visa. And we might say, well, I don't care. In the future, I don't have to. But I think a lot of people do not know. And even if you do not give them your email handle, believe me, they already have that information captured. So I just want to urge Grenadians, be mindful, be cautious, be respectful and civil in your discourse, and not just where it concerns what is happening in the US now, but in general, be civil, be courteous, have manners in the way we speak about and to each other. But going back to the Cubans, I want to commend the Cuban service, those men who have served us here in Grenada all these years and across the world and in the region. I believe that our civilization, our country, our healthcare has been better off. I know that in the case of Cubans are employed in Grenada, they are employed properly. In fact, sometimes you hear the complaints from our workers locally that the Cuban nurses and doctors who come here, they do better off. They are better off than local nurses and doctors because we provide their accommodation. We make sure we give them proper accommodations. They receive their salaries and that sort of a thing. The region does not have a choice, in my opinion. We have to stand together in solidarity. Cuba is our brother, is our sister, and we have been standing with them. And I believe at this point, our regional governments have no choice but to be able to articulate their own policies for their own region and their own countries, as I've just said, the United States of America should be allowed to do. Um, Ministry of Foreign Affairs and maybe General Hospital Health or Ministry of Health can give more information on that. But as for human trafficking and all these other claims that are being made, I do not know that we have any concerns about that in Grenada. We treat our Cubans well. They provide an invaluable service to our nation, and God willing, going forward, they are going to be able to continue doing that.
Mhm. All right, I want to thank you so much for joining me here on The Narrative. Daisy Hazard, President-elect of the Public Workers Union, and congratulations once again. I look forward to seeing you roar at the head of the Public Workers Union.
I am
Thank you for being
woman.
on.
Thank
You
you.
hear
Thank
her
you,
roar.
Kalishra. Thank you to
All
your
right. Thank
viewers.
you so much
I'm
for being
woman.
on.
Hear me roar.
Yes. This
Thank
is the
you.
narrative. This is the narrative. I'm Callistra Farrier. More when we come back.